The chandeliers of La Renaissance sparkled like frozen constellations, their golden light draping the dining hall in a glow reserved for Manhattan's wealthiest. Soft laughter and the clink of crystal glasses floated through the air, the kind of sound that spoke of money and power. In the corner, at her favorite table, sat Victoria Ashford. Her presence alone seemed to command the room, refined, elegant, untouchable. She was the woman who could sway markets with a single phone call, the CEO of Ashford Industries, one of the richest women in America. Tonight she dined alone, and she carried herself as though solitude was not loneliness, but privilege. She set down her fork with precision, sipping her wine as if every movement was a performance. Around her, the elite of the city whispered and plotted their fortunes. To them, La Renaissance was not just a restaurant, it was a stage. No one could have imagined that within moments, the performance would shatter. The front doors burst open. 4 men stormed in, their heavy boots pounding against the polished marble. The room froze. For a heartbeat, silence strangled the air, broken only by the faint tinkling of a dropped fork. Then came the sharp metallic clack of a lock sliding shut, followed by the scrape of chairs as diners pushed back in fear. Scarface, the leader, moved first. He was broad, his presence overwhelming, and the scar that carved across his cheek made him look like a man who had already lived through 100 battles. His voice cut through the golden air like a blade. "Phones on the table, now!" His command rippled through the crowd. Nails, jittering behind him, waved his gun with a nervous twitch. His eyes darted around the room like a man too high on adrenaline, or something stronger. He was dangerous not because he was ruthless, but because he was unpredictable. Tank loomed like a wall of muscle. Ripping a crowbar as if it were a toy. His silence spoke louder than threats. He didn't need words. His size said everything. And then there was Whisper, the quiet one, whose cold gaze swept the room with surgical precision. He carried himself differently, calculating, watching. He didn't bark orders or wave his weapon wildly. He simply observed, as though every terrified face was part of an equation he was already solving. Victoria felt the barrel of fear press against her chest for the first time in years. She had stared down senators, boardroom rivals, and government regulators without flinching. But this was chaos, unpredictable and raw. She placed her phone gently on the table, her fingers betraying the slightest tremor. Scarface strode forward, his boots echoing like drumbeats of doom. 50 million, right now, or blood fills this room. Gasps, cries. The elegant hum of La Renaissance collapsed into panic. Diners clutched one another, sobbing, begging. The waitstaff huddled against the walls, trembling. The world of power and silk gowns had transformed into a cage of fear. And yet, through the chaos, one detail seemed impossible. At a corner table, a boy of no more than 15 chewed slowly on a hamburger, his posture relaxed, his expression distant, as though none of this concerned him. He wore a simple school uniform, his backpack leaning against his chair, scuffed sneakers planted firmly on the floor. He didn't tremble. He didn't cry. He didn't even look up. Scarface noticed first, his brows furrowing as his voice boomed again. "Hey, kid." The boy finally raised his eyes, calm, steady, almost bored, the kind of look that made even seasoned criminals hesitate. And in that frozen second, Victoria Ashford, the billionaire who thought she'd seen everything, felt something she hadn't felt in years, dread. Because in that boy's eyes, there wasn't femme, or there was calculation, and that was far more terrifying. The restaurant was no longer a sanctuary of wealth and luxury. It had become a prison, its glittering chandeliers now nothing more than cruel reminders of a world turned upside down. Scarface's demand still echoed in the air, his menacing growl hanging like smoke. Yet all eyes had shifted toward the boy at the corner table, the only soul untouched by panic. Daniel Reeves set his burger down with deliberate care. He dabbed his mouth with a napkin, as though dining etiquette mattered more than the trembling gun barrels aimed at him. He finally looked at Scarface, his calm, steady gaze cutting through the man's hardened exterior. 4 minutes, 37 seconds, Daniel said quietly, his voice steady but loud enough to be heard. Scarface frowned, confused. "What the hell did you just say?" Daniel leaned back in his chair, folding his hands across his lap. "That's how long you have before the police storm this building. They were signaled the moment you locked that door. Sirens are already on their way." The words slid into the room like ice water. Whisper tilted his head, intrigued. Nails twitched, his gun jerking wildly as fear crept into his face. Tank scowled, clearly preferring fists over puzzles. Scarface tried to laugh, but there was no humor in it. "You think you're clever, kid? Trying to scare us with fairy tales?" Daniel didn't smile. His eyes, too sharp, too old for his age, never wavered. Check your watch, 4 minutes 30. Whisper's gaze sharpened. He studied Daniel, not like a child, but like a potential threat. The boy's voice carried no tremor, no desperation. It wasn't bluff. Whisper had spent years reading people, and he knew instinctively this was real. Victoria Ashford, seated only a few tables away, watched with mounting disbelief. She had built an empire by reading boardrooms the way Whisper read battlefields, and she recognized the aim thing, composure, the kind you only see in people who've stared down danger before. But how could a boy, barely old enough for high school, carry himself like this? Nails sneered, trying to mask his unease. He's just a punk, wants to play smart. Shut up, Whisper cut him off, his tone flat, commanding. His eyes never left Daniel. The kid isn't lying. Scarface's scarred face tightened. He hated losing control. You think this brat knows more than us? He's just some spoiled rich kid. But Daniel leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on the table as if about to deliver a lesson. If I were spoiled, I'd be crying for my parents right now. I'm not. I'm telling you how this ends. He paused, letting the silence hang heavy, gripping the terrified diners around them. When those doors break open, you'll wish you'd walked out empty-handed. The words pierced the room, heavier than the guns themselves. For the first time, Scarface faltered, and Victoria Ashford felt her heart twist. Because she wasn't looking at a boy anymore. She was looking at something far more dangerous. A mind sharpened like a blade. A calm born not of ignorance, but of preparation. And as Daniel's gaze swept across the men holding the restaurant hostage, the same thought crept into everyone's mind. Who was this boy? Scarface's jaw tightened as the seconds ticked by. The boy's voice still lingered in the air, heavy, unsettling, impossible to ignore. Around them, diners clutched their pearls, their hands, their children, waiting for either mercy or madness to decide their fate. The chandeliers swayed faintly from the earlier commotion, their crystals trembling like nervous hearts. Scarface slammed the butt of his gun against a nearby table, sending plates crashing to the floor. You think you're in charge here? His words were thunder, but there was something hollow behind them now, as though the boy's calm had stolen a piece of his authority. Daniel didn't flinch. His eyes stayed locked on Scarface, as steady as a ticking clock. You're not in charge of anything, he said quietly. Not the room, not your men, not even yourself. Nails barked out a laugh too sharp, too forced. Listen to this little freak. Talks like he's some kind of professor. His gun jittered in his hands, betraying him more than his words. The pills had him sweating, his nerves raw and frayed. Daniel glanced at him, just a glance, but it was enough. You, he said evenly, shouldn't be holding a weapon. You're shaking too much. Adrenaline? Or is it withdrawal? Either way, you'll pull that trigger by accident before you ever make a decision. The words cut Nails deeper than any blade. He shifted uncomfortably, muttering curses under his breath, but the doubt had already taken root. Tank, looming behind them all, cracked his neck and growled, "Why don't we shut the kid up before he talks us all to death?" But Whisper raised a hand. His eyes had narrowed, fixed on Daniel with unnerving interest. "No," he murmured, his voice calm, clinical. "Let him speak." Scarface shot him a look. "What? You taking orders from a kid now?" Whisper ignored him. His mind was racing, piecing together the clues, the precision. In Daniel's words, the lack of fear, the subtle way he seemed to see everything. Whisper had once trained corporate bodyguards to profile threats in seconds. This boy was no ordinary threat. He was a puzzle. Daniel leaned back in his chair, speaking as though he were explaining something inevitable. 3 minutes left. You don't hear the sirens yet because the city learned a long time ago not to spook people during a crisis. But when they come, they'll come fast and heavy. He turned his gaze deliberately to Scarface. And when they do, your men won't follow you, because right now, you're bleeding control. Scarface bristled, stepping closer, his gun hovering inches from Daniel's head. You think you know me, kid? Daniel's voice dropped, almost a whisper, but sharp enough for every corner of the room to hear. I don't need to know you, I can see you. You're ex-military, the scar, the stance, the way you take charge but hesitate when someone smarter pushes back. You've been locked up before. You're not leading these men because you're the strongest. You're leading them because no one else wanted the burden. Whisper's eyes flickered. Nails swallowed hard. Even Tank's jaw clenched. The boy wasn't just talking. He was unraveling them, thread by thread. Victoria Ashford watched from her table, her glass of wine untouched, her pulse racing. She had built her empire by mastering power plays, but what she saw now was unlike anything she'd ever encountered. The boy was dismantling 4 grown men without lifting a finger. It was brilliant. It was terrifying. Scarface's grip on his weapon faltered just slightly, but Daniel caught it. He caught everything. He leaned forward again, his voice calm, commanding, certain. You want money? 50 million. But you don't even realize what you've walked into. You chose the wrong place, the wrong night, the wrong people. His gaze swept the room, then locked back onto the four men. And most of all, the wrong boy. The silence that followed was suffocating. The only sound was the faint tick of an antique clock near the bar. Then, far away but growing closer, came the wail of sirens, exactly on time. And in that moment, every man in the room felt it, the shift. The power didn't belong to Scarface anymore. It belonged to the boy. The first faint wail of sirens reached the gilded dining room, slipping through the sealed doors like the whisper of judgment. Scarface stiffened, his jaw tightening, his scar glistening under the chandelier's fractured light. Nails cursed under his breath, his jittering hands trembling more violently now. Tank's grip on his crowbar flexed as though he could crush the steel with his bare hands. Whisper alone stayed calm, his eyes fixed on the boy who had just unraveled them all with nothing more than words. Daniel Reeves stood slowly, pushing his chair back with a scrape that cut through the silence. Every eye followed him. He wasn't tall, he wasn't broad, just a teenager in a school uniform, his hair slightly tousled, his sneakers worn. And yet, when he moved, it was deliberate. Every gesture efficient, every breath controlled. He wasn't a boy standing up. He was something else entirely. Scarface barked, "Sit down, kid." His voice cracked under the weight of authority slipping from his grasp. Daniel didn't sit. Instead, his eyes flicked briefly to the chandelier overhead, then to a fire extinguisher mounted discreetly near the wall. His hand brushed the table as though counting the objects in reach. A fork, a glass, a plate. Tools, not dinnerware. Then everything happened in a blur. With the sudden, startling speed of someone trained for moments exactly like this, Daniel kicked the table's edge. It flipped upward, plates and glasses exploding into the air like shrapnel. The chandelier above groaned as a chair, hurled with unexpected strength, head into its chain. Crystal shards rained down, showering Scarface in a cascade of blinding glass. Nails staggered back, clutching his eyes as Daniel grabbed the fire extinguisher, yanking it from the wall in one swift motion. A white cloud hissed into the room, choking, disorienting. The diners screamed, ducking for cover. Tank roared like an animal and charged forward, swinging his crowbar. Daniel sidestepped, fluid and precise, his small frame slipping past the brute's bulk. He struck a pressure point in Tank's arm with the extinguisher, a sharp crack echoing as Tank's weapon clattered to the floor. The giant dropped to his knees with a bellow of pain. Scarface tried to steady himself, but his vision was blurred from glass cuts. Daniel turned the extinguisher toward him, releasing another blinding burst that sent the leader stumbling, coughing, clawing at the air. In the chaos, Whisper raised his weapon, but then stopped. His eyes narrowed. He didn't move. He just watched, calculating. The boy wasn't acting on impulse. Every step, every strike, every choice was deliberate. Whisper recognized it for what it was, strategy. This was no frightened teenager thrashing in desperation. This was training, ruthless, precise training. Victoria Ashford, her breath caught in her throat, couldn't look away. She had survived hostile takeovers, courtroom battles, political wars. She knew strategy when she saw it, but never in her life had she seen it embodied in a boy. The fire alarm shrieked as smoke from the extinguisher triggered the system. Sprinklers hissed to life, pouring water over the glittering hall. Diners screamed and scrambled, their panic amplified by the rain of cold water. The restaurant was a battlefield now, no longer a sanctuary. And in the center of it all stood Daniel Reeves, soaked, steady, his chest rising and falling in calm rhythm, while the foe, our men who had stormed in with guns and violence, reeled under his counterattack. Scarface cursed, blood streaking down his face. Nails shouted something incoherent. Tank groaned on the ground. Whisper alone remained upright, his gun still in his hand, but lowered. His cold, calculating eyes never left Daniel. For the first time, the four predators who had come to devour this room realized something terrifying. They were no longer hunters. They were prey, and the boy was in control. Water poured from the sprinklers in shimmering streams, soaking velvet suits and designer gowns, turning the floor into a slick mirror of chaos. The once pristine dining hall now reeked of fear and smoke, its elegance drowned beneath alarms and cries. Yet in the center of it all, Daniel Reeves stood steady, drenched, unflinching, eyes burning with a calm that felt inhuman. Scarface wiped blood from his cheek, his breath ragged, his authority unraveling with every second. Nails fumbled, his weapon shaking so violently that even he seemed terrified of pulling the trigger. Tank groaned on the floor, clutching his arm, the brute force drained out of him. Whisper remained motionless, his gun still in hand, but lowered, his stare locked on Daniel with a strange mixture of suspicion and respect. Then the sound came, the sharp wail of sirens outside growing louder, nearer. Red and blue lights flickered faintly against the restaurant's rain-streaked windows. Daniel tilted his head toward the doors as if listening to a rhythm only he could hear. "Right on time," he murmured. The four men froze. His prediction had been exact, too exact. Scarface spat in frustration, trying to reclaim his grip. "So what? Cops show up, we grab a hostage, we still walk out. That's how this goes." Daniel's gaze flicked to him, and his voice, low and even, cut sharper than any blade. "No. That's how it goes when you're in control, but you're not." The words landed like blows. Nails looked at Scarface, doubt twisting his features. Tank shifted uncomfortably, pain and confusion dulling his loyalty. Even Whisper's jaw tightened. The hierarchy was crumbling, and the boy was the one dismantling it. For a moment, no one moved. The only sounds were alarms, sobbing diners, and the relentless rain of sprinklers. Then Daniel straightened, water dripping from his hair, and spoke with quiet finality. "Do you want to know why I'm not afraid? Why I can sit here while you wave your guns around?" His voice carried through the room, commanding every ear. "Because I've been trained for this moment my entire life." Scarface scoffed, but his laugh was hollow. "Trained? You're just a kid." Daniel's eyes darkened. "My father was General Marcus Reeves." The name cut through the restaurant like lightning. Gasps erupted from the older diners, men and women who knew the weight of that name. Even Victoria Ashford stiffened, her breath catching as recognition struck her like a blade to the chest. General Marcus Reeves, the man who had led secret missions across continents, who had been revered and feared in equal measure, who had died under mysterious circumstances whispered about in government halls. His legacy was myth, wrapped in shadow, and now his son stood before them. Scarface's face drained of color. Nails lowered his gun, hands trembling. Tank looked lost, fear replacing rage. Whisper alone didn't flinch, but his eyes narrowed, calculating faster now, trying to reconcile the impossibility before him. Daniel took a step forward, his presence far larger than his frame. "My father prepared me for this world, for men like you, for nights like this. You came here thinking you were predators, but you never saw the real trap." The four men, once masters of the room, now stood paralyzed, every ounce of bravado stripped away. Even Victoria, who had built an empire on ruthlessness, felt her heart pound with something she had not felt in decades. Genuine fear. The boy's voice lowered, steady, unyielding. "You don't walk out of here as men in control. You walk out as proof. Proof that power belongs to those who can see further, move faster, and never lose their calm." The sirens grew louder, closer. The shadows of armed responders flickered outside the windows. The moment stretched, heavy, unbreakable. And in that frozen silence, the truth became undeniable. The boy was no victim. He was the reckoning. Victoria Ashford sat drenched beneath the downpour of sprinklers, her silk blouse clinging to her skin, her diamond necklace glinting faintly under the strobe of police lights flashing through the windows. But for the first time in years, she didn't care about appearances. She couldn't. The boy's words echoed in her mind, louder than the alarms, louder than the terrified cries around her. "My father was General Marcus Reeves." It struck her with the weight of history. Marcus Reeves, the decorated war hero, the tactician whose name was spoken in the halls of power with both reverence and unease. He had uncovered truths that others had buried, truths that men and women like her had paid to stay hidden. And he had died suddenly, accidentally, though whispers of foul play had clung to his death like smoke no one could clear. And now here was his son. Victoria's eyes locked on Daniel. The boy didn't pace like a child in panic. He didn't shrink from the guns. He stood at the center of chaos with a composure that felt almost regal. She had watched generals, CEOs, and politicians try to command a room. Not one of them had ever held it like this boy did. Her breath hitched as her gaze dropped to the corner of his backpack. Notebooks, worn and frayed, peeked from the zipper. Even from where she sat, she recognized the military shorthand scribbled on the edges. Her blood ran cold. Those weren't school notes. They were field report. Zalous logs. Maybe even fragments of the very evidence Marcus Reeves had once gathered. She pressed her palm to the table, steadying herself as a revelation crept in, chilling her to the bone. This boy wasn't just surviving the night. He was executing a mission. Scarface, blood streaming down his temple, tried to shake the weight of Daniel's revelation. General or not, you're still just a kid, he growled, though his voice cracked with something dangerously close to doubt. Daniel's gaze flicked to him, unimpressed. You're too slow to understand what's already happening, he said calmly. He nodded toward the windows where shadows of armed responders grew clearer against the glass. You're boxed in. Every escape you think you have, I already closed it. The words hit Victoria harder than they hit the robbers, because she realized something horrifying. The boy wasn't bluffing. He hadn't just reacted to the attack, he had anticipated it. Her stomach twisted as another thought surfaced. This wasn't coincidence. This restaurant, this night, even her presence here, it was all too perfectly timed. Was she part of his design? The realization made her heart pound against her ribs. For years, she had believed herself untouchable, the apex predator in a city of power brokers. But as she stared at Daniel Reeves, so young, so impossibly composed, she felt something she had not allowed herself to feel in decades, exposed. Her eyes dropped again to his backpack. Operation Cleanup. She had heard whispers of it years ago, a shadow dossier her enemies had claimed Marcus Reeves was building before his death, a dossier that could burn entire empires, including hers. She had laughed it off then, confident it had died with him. But now, as Daniel's presence filled the room with a quiet authority that bent even hardened criminals to stillness, she understood the truth. It hadn't died. It had been inherited. And the boy standing before her was not just Marcus Reeves's son. He was his father's unfinished war. The restaurant had gone silent except for the hiss of sprinklers and the distant wail of sirens. Broken glass glittered across the marble floor, candles lay toppled, and once immaculate tables were overturned like barricades in a battlefield. But all of that faded into the background, because the true war unfolding now wasn't between guns and fists. It was between Daniel Reeves and Victoria Ashford. The four men, moments ago brimming with bravado, were shadows of themselves. Scarface, scar still freshened with blood, clung to his weapon like a drowning man to driftwood. Tank rubbed his jaw, blinking through the ache of Daniel's surgical strikes. Nails twitched so badly his gun barrel jittered like a nervous finger tapping on a desk. Whisper, the one who always believed he was the strategist, kept staring at Daniel as if trying, and failing, to calculate him. The boy had dismantled them, not just with violence but with precision, with information, and that was what terrified them. Victoria sat frozen in her chair, soaked, disheveled, her diamond necklace clinging to her collarbone like a noose. She had stared down boardroom rivals, hostile takeovers, and political interrogations without breaking a sweat. But this 15-year-old boy dissecting criminals and commanding fear with nothing but calm certainty, this was something else entirely. Daniel's voice cut through the thick, wet air. You think this is about money? About a transfer? He shook his head slowly, deliberately. This is about something you'll never understand. His gaze shifted, locking onto Victoria. Loyalty. The word hit her harder than a bullet. Scarface barked a laugh, desperate, manic. Kids bluffing. Cops will storm in, spray the place with bullets, and then what? He goes down with us. Daniel didn't even flinch. You really think the NYPD will fire blind into Manhattan's most expensive restaurant while one of the richest women in the country is inside? He gestured toward Victoria without even looking at her. Your leverage, and she knows it. Every head in the room turned to Victoria, her stomach twisted. For years, she had hidden behind her wealth, her name, her carefully cultivated image of control. And now, in front of everyone, this boy had reduced her to what she really was, a pawn. Daniel stepped closer, water dripping from his hair, his eyes sharper than glass. 4 minutes, he murmured, his voice low but carrying, was all I needed. To lock you in, to make you show your hand. And now, he let the silence stretch, the sprinklers ticking like a metronome above them. The real game begins. Victoria found her voice, trembling though it was. Who are you? Daniel's gaze didn't waver. The son of the man you killed. It was as if the world stopped. The robbers exchanged confused glances. Scarface frowned. Tank muttered under his breath, but Whisper, ever the observer, saw it. The subtle collapse of Victoria's composure, the flicker of recognition in her eyes, the guilt she tried to bury. Whisper swallowed hard. Wait, he's not bluffing, is he? Daniel took another step forward. General Marcus Reeves. You remember the name, Ms. Ashford. You remember the investigation. You remember the documents he had, the ones you thought vanished when he did. Victoria's pulse hammered in her throat. She wanted to deny it, wanted to summon the icy arrogance that had built her empire, but she couldn't, because the boy wasn't guessing. He knew, and if he knew this much, what else did he have? Her hands shook beneath the table. The sprinklers kept hissing. The robbers stood paralyzed, uncertain whether they had been the predators or the prey all along. And Daniel Reeves, 15 years old, drenched and defiant, stood in the middle of it all like a gene. Rail stepping onto his battlefield. The guns no longer mattered. The money no longer mattered. The true battle had begun. The glass doors of La Renaissance finally burst open, and floodlights spilled across the wreckage. Armed officers stormed inside, weapons raised, voices booming commands. Patrons scattered into the safety of waiting ambulances, their sobs mixing with the static of radios and the rush of boots against marble. But amid the chaos, Daniel Reeves didn't move. He stood in the center of the restaurant, drenched, calm, his backpack slung loosely on one shoulder. His eyes weren't on the police. They were locked on Victoria Ashford. The billionaire hadn't risen from her chair. She sat rigid, her power stripped bare, her trembling fingers clutching at her soaked blouse as though fabric could shield her from the boy's gaze. For the first time in her life, she looked small. Scarface and his crew dropped their weapons immediately, surrendering to the onslaught of tactical shouts, but their eyes weren't on the police either. They were on Daniel, because even in defeat, it was clear. They feared him more than the law. The officers pressed them to the ground, cuffing them with mechanical efficiency, but Daniel didn't flinch at the clatter of metal restraints or the bark of orders. He waited, letting the moment stretch until silence reclaimed the ruined restaurant. Then, in that stillness, he walked toward Victoria. Every step echoed. She forced herself to lift her chin to meet his eyes. "What do you want from me?" she demanded, her voice breaking despite the steel she tried to muster. Daniel stopped in front of her, his voice calm as ever sliced through her defenses. "Justice." Her laugh was hollow, desperate. "Justice? You're a child. What could you possibly know about justice?" Daniel bent slightly, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "Enough to know that men like my father die because of people like you. Enough to know that soldiers bled while you cashed their live, as into diamonds and yachts. And enough to know that your empire is already crumbling." Her breath caught. "What are you talking about?" Daniel unzipped his backpack with deliberate slowness, pulling out a slim black folder. He placed it gently on the table in front of her, like an executioner laying down a blade. She hesitated before opening it, her hands shaking. Inside were documents, photographs, and recordings, evidence she thought had been buried with Marcus Reeves. Her face drained of color. Daniel straightened, his expression unreadable. "Operation Cleanup didn't die with my father. He trained me to finish it. Every account, every transfer, every bribe, all of it is copied and secured in 17 different places." He leaned closer, his words striking like a gavel. "By morning, the world will know." Victoria's throat tightened. "You'll destroy everything." Daniel's eyes glistened, not with triumph, but with grief hardened into resolve. "No, you already destroyed everything. I'm just making sure the truth survives." The weight of his words hung between them, heavier than any verdict. Around them, the police herded the robbers away, EMTs checked the wounded, but none of it mattered. The real devastation was happening here, in the hollow collapse of a woman who had believed herself untouchable. Victoria whispered, barely audible, "Who are you?" Daniel's reply was soft, but it carried the force of his father's legacy. "I'm the son of the man you killed, and I'm the end of everything you built." He turned without waiting for her response, the folder still open before her like a mirror reflecting her crimes. He walked toward the exit, passing officers who didn't question him, as though some invisible authority cleared his path. Outside, the night air was cool, heavy with sirens and city noise. Daniel paused for just a moment, staring up at the dark Manhattan and sky. His father's voice seemed to echo in the back of his mind. "Observe everything. Always have a plan B, C, and D." Daniel adjusted his backpack and stepped into the crowd, vanishing into the city like a shadow with a mission unfinished. Behind him, Victoria Ashford sat paralyzed, her empire already falling piece by piece, her future sealed not by rivals in boardrooms, but by the quiet vengeance of a boy who carried his father's war in his blood. And the world, though it did not know it yet, was about to learn who Daniel Reeves truly was.